It's the final weekend of the FIDE Candidates. There are 2 more rounds to be played. And 3 guys are in the lead. Jan Nepomniachtchi played against Hikaru Nakamura. Very interesting game. Ended in the draw. Gukesh is the other co-leader. And therefore he has the chance to grab the sole lead. He is playing against Alireza Firouzja, who wants the tournament to be over as soon as possible. He lost many games. Is out of contention for the qualification for the World Championship match. But nevertheless, he's still playing very enterprising chess. So this game promises to be very interesting. Let's see what's going to happen. I just want to make one small thank you to all of you guys who have made a donation to support the channel. Really appreciate it. You can also hit the subscribe button or consider to find this PayPal link and just help me to grow the channel, and would really appreciate all of that. Anyway, I'm going to show you what happened in the game. Gukesh starts here with the move 1e4, e5. Not sure this is a surprise. Has been played, of course, before by Firouzja, but in this tournament he also played the Sicilian and the French defense. So anyway, after e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, Spanish opening, and we get to see the Berlin defense, but a very interesting one. d3, bishop c5, castling kingside, and here Black plays interesting move, knight d4, attacking both the knight and the bishop, so aiming for simplifications. Knight d4, bishop takes d4, so far pretty standard stuff, and this is considered to be a very solid system, because after White developed the knight to d2, it's on its way to a more active square. Black goes for the move c6, attacking the bishop dropped back to c4, and after d6, pawn to c3. Chasing the bishop back, the bishop goes to b6, the bishop also comes to b3. And well, this position has been seen in a number of Grandmaster games. In most games, guys are going for castling kingside here, which is a very logical move. But what Firouzja does also does make sense. He played here the move a5 with potential ideas later on to play something like a4. Maybe not immediately, but definitely if Black can grab some space, that would be quite comfortable for him. Knight c4 played, trying to grab this bishop. So the bishop goes back to a7, stays on this diagonal. And here, well, actually one game of Magnus Carlsen against Levon Aronian, in which White played the move a4 to prevent the black pawn from coming any further, because if you play anything else, let's say something like king h1 with the idea to prepare f4, which was seen in the game of Karyakin also against Aronian, there is this move a4 and Black gets exactly what it wants. This move a4, forcing the bishop to go back, because if you take the pawn, there is the move b5 and you're losing a piece. Anyway, now you understand that sometimes a4 is a serious move to reckon with, and Gukesh played the move knight e3, which now ensures that the knight will never come under threat of b5, but at the same time you're hindering the development of your dark squared bishop as well as the rook on a1. So after castling kingside, queen f3, Black grabs some space in the center. Does look quite interesting in fact. Everything is well covered here. Bishop c2 played, and now the move g6, guarding the f5 square, so the knight cannot jump there. Rook to e1. And well, here the bishop comes to e6. And still, what is White going to do with that bishop on c1? That is a big question. Maybe Black even will consider to grab more space in the center with a move like d4. After all, he's pretty well developed. And, well, I think White's pieces, they look a bit clumsy. So White decided to take here on d5. C takes d5, but it's clear that Black has now very pleasant position with his pawn center. I don't want to say that he's really better here, but looks to me like if I have to pick a side, it would be just Black here. Well, h3 played to guard the g4 square. Rook e8 on the board, supporting the pawn on e5, but allowing bishop to a4 to hit the rook. And well, if you move the rook again, well, that's a serious admission that your last move was not great at all. And look at this, if you do play knight f1, the bishop comes into the game to g5 to pin the knight. You're also hitting the pawn on e5. Things are looking great. So what did Firouzja had in mind here? Well, he played the move e4 to attack the queen. Pawn takes e4, d takes e4, and the queen goes back to e2. So black is having, once again, this nice space advantage, but he got to do something about the rook. So the rook goes to e7 here. And, well, white finally is going to do something about the development of that bishop. So played knight f1. Knight is temporarily not doing too great on that square, but it opens up the path for the bishop to come up to g5 to set up a huge skewer, and therefore the queen goes to c7. And the idea is that after something like bishop g5, black can ignore the threat here by playing the move bishop c4. That is the main point of the queen on c7, to hit the queen on e2. And black is having a fantastic position here with beautiful bishops shining at the white king. Anyway, after queen c7, white doesn't want to allow bishop c4, played bishop to b3, aiming for simplifications. And here the move a4 was played, which is a very nice, interesting, dynamical pawn sacrifice. Because if you do take it, well, the bishop will come in to c4, and this queen doesn't look great at all. There are all sorts of tactical ideas where black is trying to seize the initiative by targeting the enemy's pieces. So black is doing in a very well at this point. So after a4, I think Gukesh is not interested in these sort of tactics where his pieces are simply inferior than its counterparts. He just takes on e6. Very logical move. Rook takes back to keep the pawn supported, and now finally the bishop comes to e3, not only developing the remaining piece, but also trying to neutralize one of black's best pieces. Black wants to destroy the pawn formation on the queen side, so that if you do play b3, the pawn on c3 can be taken. So that's not a good idea. Instead, white went for the move c4, so defending the pawn. But there's also another point, that if black is going to take back with the queen, you may take on c4, but there's also queen takes b7. And, well, white just untangles and is doing absolutely fine. After queen d5 or so, probably the queens are going to be exchanged. And, well, it's a very even position. But Firouzja knows that he's doing okay. He can try to equalize, but he can also try to create more problems for his opponent. So look what he did here. He played the move knight h5. So the knight is intending to come to f4 to set up a threat against the queen. Therefore g3 is played. But now the bishop comes to c5. I mean, the knight on h5 is sort of stranded, but you do have control over the queen side. You're neutralizing white's majority, at least for the moment. And by placing the bishop on c5, you also enable the rook to come over to a better place somewhere on the 8th rank. White played the move b3, so now the queen side is more stable, and black also mobilizes his own kingside majority. Look at this beautiful pawn chain with potential ideas to launch an attack against the white king. So bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, and here the rook comes to d1. So although black is having some nice space advantage on the king side, white does control the open file. But what should black do? I think this is an incredibly difficult moment in the game because you want to do something with the rook, but where should the rook go to? Rook ae8 is a very interesting idea to connect with the other rook. Everything is well protected here, and maybe later on you have plans to, for instance, break with a move like f4, and then who knows, maybe you can try to get closer to the king. Was not played in the game. There followed the move rook f8, which is also understandable if you're intending here to push the pawn to f4, but white is first. White takes his rook to put it on d5, hitting the queen. The queen goes back to e7, and now with the move f4, white is preventing the black f-pawn to come any further. Even though black is having now a protected passed pawn, this pawn is not dangerous at all. And white always will have ideas to set up a blockade on the e3 square with its knight. Knight is a great blockader, and then the pawn will be neutralized and white can try to take over the initiative on the d file. Should be said that after f4, taking en passant is not a possibility because the rook on e6 is hanging. What can black do instead? Various ideas. Maybe shift the rook to the e-file, overprotecting everything. Keeping the knight on h5 is actually not such a bad idea, as in that case, the pawn on g3 is still controlled by that knight, and that means the knight on f1 is unable to move. But that's always difficult. If you move your knight back to f6 to hit the rook goes back, but very soon the knight will also come to e3 and then rook ed1. Hard to say who is better here, but Firouzja, true to his style, he's not gonna sit and wait. Even in such a horrible tournament for him, he's looking for adventurous type of chess. And he played this idea, g5, opening up the king side with the point that you want to eliminate that pawn on f4. If white is gonna take here on g5, the knight will come to d7 with the plan of jumping to e5, followed by knight f3 with a threat against the king and the rook, and also the pawn on g5 can be taken. So white is not gonna accept that pawn sacrifice. Played instead knight e3. That's where the knight belongs, and it even targets the pawn on f5 now, which is another drawback of pushing the pawn in front of your king, no longer defending the pawn. G takes f4, g takes f4 was played, and here the move queen to f7. Interesting idea. So you're indirectly supporting the pawn on f5. If you ever take that pawn, I believe the simplest move here is not to play queen g6 with a double attack, because white can still play queen g2, pinning the queen, so there's no time to take the knight. But instead, after knight takes f5, a very nice move is knight h5 with tremendous pressure against the knight on f5, and also you're about to take on f4, and the black pieces, they are very near the white king. So white is not going to take. Instead, white really wants to consolidate its position. Played here the move king h2, so that the rook can always come over to the g-file. Knight h5 played anyway, attacking the pawn. Queen f2, defending the pawn. There's rook g6. White goes rook d5, attacking the pawn one more time, which means that you need to find a way to defend the pawn. Therefore, the knight goes back to g7, but obviously this is a small concession because the knight is no longer in the attack. White goes for the move rook ad1, looking for counterplay, maybe to attack the queen, maybe to offer the exchange of rooks. Here, rook h6 is played, and if you do play, for instance, now something like rook d7, black was planning to meet that move with queen h5, with threats against the white king. So instead, white played it safe before reaching the time bonus of 30 minutes on move 40. It's move 39 here. White played rook g1, pinning the knight on g7. Queen h5 is an idea, but also black played it safe with the move rook g6, so that after rook g to d1, rook h6, we have a possible repetition of moves. Rook g1, rook g6, and here, if white goes rook g1, it's for the third time repetition. It would be a handshake and the game ends in a draw. But here, Gukesh really felt that he is dominating the position with pressure against the pawn on f5, with a beautiful rook on the open file. His major pieces are more active, and perhaps even his king is more safe. So he decided to play on with the move queen h4. Queen is active, rook takes rook, king takes rook. And what is going to happen here? Very difficult to say what should be done. You feel like black is stuck here defending the pawn on f5, but with something like knight e6, there is definitely counterplay. You may give up the pawn on f5, but after moves like rook takes pawn, there's queen g6 with very good play, and black is more than fine. So was not played in the game. There followed the move king h8, getting out of the g file. So he's planning to get a rook over there. After king to f2, well, there are new ideas, but knight e6, activating the knight is no longer possible because of rook takes f5, and there's no check on the g file. What can be played instead? Maybe queen g6 is an option, keeping everything defended, but black is very passive. But probably that's alright if he wants to save the game. But here, Firouzja went for rook to g8, and white played here the move queen g5, putting pressure against that pawn. And this is a big moment in the game because Firouzja played here the move queen g6, and that is a shocking mistake. He is allowing the exchange of queens, and white is way more active in the endgame. Instead, if you do play knight e6, attacking the queen, attacking the pawn, after queen takes f5, the key idea which black had to see in advance is the move queen g7 with ideas to infiltrate with your queen, and black is apparently alright. You cannot take the knight because of queen g1, king e2, queen h2. The pawn prevents the king from escaping, and if you go something like king e1, it's rook g1, and here black is going to win the game very soon. So this is a very spectacular line. This is leading to mate in a few moves. However, if white is going to play it safe after this move queen g7, you can still play queen e5, force the exchange of queens, but after take, and for instance taking back with, if you take back with the rook, it's knight takes f4, black is okay, because the pawn on h3 is hanging, and well, instead if you take with the pawn on e5, then it's rook f8 with a lot of counterplay. It's check, rook may come in, the knight may come to f4. It may look as if white is still better, but apparently this is still good for, this is still okay for black. Instead, queen g6 was played, as I said, but now, okay, queens are coming off the board, and even though you're improving your pawn structure, there is this move rook to d6, attacking the pawn. And well, there's no really good way to play here. Also, white has other ideas to go after the pawn on b7. So this rook is just simply much better than the rook on g8. White is in the driver's seat with other ideas to activate a knight as well. Black played rook e8. But now white decided to take the pawn. There are other options as well, including to move the knight and put the king on e3 is another nice technical plan of trying to further increase your advantage. But now, knight e6 played, hoping for knight takes f5, knight takes f4 with more unclear consequences. When you're up material and you have a better position, you don't want to allow these exchanges. Knight e5 is a better way of playing, defending the pawn, and hopefully later white will be able to eliminate the remaining pawn block in the center. Knight d4 played, and look at this. Rook to b6. You're going after the pawn. And, well, this is not an easy position. Maybe black can try to sacrifice the pawn, but that's very difficult move to see. And after knight takes rook e4, it's even not clear if you do have enough compensation to save the game. But instead, what Firouzja did is worse. He went for the move knight c2. And I guess that after rook takes b7, he just realized now that e3, which he eventually didn't play, is not really going to work. The knight and rook are supporting the pawn, but after king e2, the king is blocking the pawn. You can give a check now to force the king to leave the blockading square. And if you push the pawn is almost about to become a queen. But after knight f6, it's not about hitting the rook. It's just that after e1 queen, it's rook h7 with checkmate. That is a key idea which Gukesh calculated in advance. After rook takes b7, Firouzja didn't play here e3. Instead, rook e6 is played, but now the rook comes to e7, offering the exchange of rooks and neutralizing the pressure generated along the e-file. Rook h6 played, white pushes the pawn, ready to play c6, c7 and become a queen if the rook is leaving the 6th rank. So taking on h3 is not an option. Knight d4 played to guard this square. Now king g2, rook g6, king f2, rook h6, repetition of moves. But of course white is completely winning. Play the move b4, connected past pawns. You give up the pawn on h3, who cares about that little pawn? It's king g2, hitting the rook, rook goes back, rook b7, preparing the march of the 2 pawns with the support of the rook and the knight. King g8 played, b5 played, so the rook defends the pawn cannot be taken, king f8, b6, pawn is really strong. Rook to g6, king f2, rook h6, rook to c7, rook h2, king to g3, and here it is just game over because you're hitting the rook, you're about to go for b7, followed by b8 queen, and that means that Gukesh, with his victory, is taking the sole lead. We are witnessing here live chess history, guys. That's what it is. The 17 years old guy is in the sole lead and has a fantastic chance to become the new challenger of Ding Liren. But there is one more hurdle. He is playing in the final round against one of the runner-ups, only half a point behind. He's playing with the black pieces against Fabiano Caruana. So that is going to be an amazing, epic final, while there are also 2 other guys still there, Jan Nepomniachtchi and Hikaru Nakamura. So let's see what is going to happen at this point. Stay tuned for all the updates. Thanks for watching this video. Give it a like, share it with your friends. I will see you back very soon again. Bye bye.